Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Bernadette, PM, Shelby, Matt, Paul, Catherine, and Allison. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes heard nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscriptions required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's continue our relaxing journey through our national parks by John Muir. Let's pick up right where we left off in our travels through the wonders of Yellowstone. Let's begin. However orderly your excursions or aimless, again and again, amid the calmest, stillest scenery, you will be brought to a standstill, hushed and awe-stricken before phenomena wholly new to you. Boiling springs and huge deep pools of purest green and azure water, thousands of them, are plashing and heaving in these high, cool mountains as if a fierce furnace fire were burning beneath each one of them, and 100 geysers, white torrents of boiling water and steam, like inverted waterfalls, are ever and anon rushing up out of the hot black underworld. Some of these ponderous geyser columns are as large as sequoias, 5 to 60 feet in diameter, 150 to 300 feet high, and are sustained at this great height with tremendous energy for a few minutes, or perhaps nearly an hour, standing rigid and erect, hissing, throbbing, booming, as if thunderstorms were raging beneath their roots, their sides roughened or fluted like the furrowed boles of trees, their tops dissolving in feathery branches, while the irised spray, like misty bloom, is at times blown aside, revealing the massive shafts shining against a background of pine-covered hills. Some of them lean more or less as if storm-bent, and instead of being round are flat or fan-shaped, issuing from irregular slits in silex pavements with radiant structure, the sunbeams shifting through them in ravishing splendor. Some are broad and round-headed like oaks. Others are low and bunchy, branching near the ground like bushes, and a few are hollow in the center like big daisies or water lilies. No frost cools them. Snow never covers them nor lodges in their branches. Winter and summer they welcome alike. All of them, of whatever form or size, faithfully rising and sinking in fairy rhythmic dance night and day, in all sorts of weather, at varying periods of minutes, hours, or weeks, growing up rapidly, uncontrollable as fate, tossing their pearly branches in the wind, bursting into bloom and vanishing like the frailest flowers, plants of which nature raises hundreds or thousands of crops a year with no apparent exhaustion of the fiery soil. The so-called geyser basins, in which this rare sort of vegetation is growing, are mostly open valleys on the central plateau that were eroded by glaciers after the greater volcanic fires had ceased to burn. Looking down over the forests as you approach them from the surrounding heights, you see a multitude of white columns, broad reeking masses, and irregular jets and puffs of misty vapor ascending from the bottom of the valley, or entangled like smoke among the neighboring trees, suggesting the factories of some busy town or the campfires of an army. These mark the position of each mush pot, paint pot, hot spring, and geyser or gusher, as the Icelandic words mean, and when you saunter into the midst of them over the bright center pavements and see how pure and white and pearly gray they are in the shade of the mountains, and how radiant in the sunshine, you are fairly enchanted. So numerous they are and varied, nature seems to have gathered them from all the world as specimens of her rarest fountains, to show in one place what she can do. Over 4,000 hot springs have been counted in the park, and 100 geysers. How many more there are, nobody knows. These valleys at the heads of the great rivers may be regarded as laboratories and kitchens, in which, amid 1,000 retorts and pots, we may see nature at work as chemist or cook, cunningly compounding an infinite variety of mineral messes, cooking whole mountains, boiling and steaming flinty rocks to smooth paste and mush, yellow, brown, red, pink, lavender, gray, and creamy white, making the most beautiful mud in the world and distilling the most ethereal essences. Many of these pots and cauldrons have been boiling thousands of years. Pots of sulphurous mush, stringy and lumpy, and pots of broth as black as ink, are tossed and stirred with constant care, and thin transparent essences, too pure and fine to be called water, are kept simmering gently in beautiful center cups and bowls that grow ever more beautiful the longer they are used. In some of the spring basins, the waters, though still warm, are perfectly calm, and shine blandly in a sod of overleaning grass and flowers, as if they were thoroughly cooked at last, and set aside to settle and cool. Others are wildly boiling over as if running to waste, thousands of tons of the precious liquids being thrown into the air to fall in scalding floods on the clean coral floor of the establishment, keeping onlookers at a distance. Instead of holding limpid pale green or azure water, other pots and craters are filled with scalding mud, which is tossed up from 3 or 4 feet to 30 feet in sticky, rank-smelling masses, with gasping, belching, thudding sounds, plastering the branches of neighboring trees. Every flask, retort, hot spring, and geyser has something special in it, no two being the same in temperature, color, or composition. In these natural laboratories, one needs stout faith to feel at ease. The ground sounds hollow underfoot, and the awful subterranean thunder shakes one's mind as the ground is shaken, especially at night in the pale moonlight, or when the sky is overcast with storm clouds. In the solemn gloom, the geysers, dimly visible, look like monstrous dancing ghosts, and their wild songs in the earthquake thunder, replying to the storms overhead, seem doubly terrible, as if divine government were at an end. But the trembling hills keep their places. The sky clears, the rosy dawn is reassuring, and up comes the sun like a god, pouring his faithful beams across the mountains and forest, lighting each peak and tree and ghastly geyser alike, and shining into the eyes of the reeking springs, clothing them with rainbow light, and dissolving the seeming chaos of darkness into varied forms of harmony. The ordinary work of the world goes on. Gladly we see the flies dancing in the sunbeams, birds feeding their young, squirrels gathering nuts, and hear the blessed ouzel singing confidingly in the shallows of the river, most faithful evangel, calming every fear, reducing everything to love. The variously tinted sinter and travertine formations outspread like pavements over large areas of the geyser valleys, lining the spring basins and throats of the craters, and forming beautiful coral-like rims and curbs about them, always excite admiring attention. So also does the play of the waters from which they are deposited. The various minerals in them are rich in colors, and these are greatly heightened by a smooth, silky growth of brilliantly colored conferva, which lines many of the pools and channels and terraces. No bed of flower bloom is more exquisite than these myriads of minute plants, visible only in mass, growing in the hot waters. Most of the spring borders are low and daintily scalloped, crenellated, and beaded with center pearls. Some of the geyser craters are massive and picturesque, like ruined castles or old burned-out sequoia stumps, and are adorned on a grand scale, with out-bulging cauliflower-like formations. From these as centers the silex pavements slope gently away in thin, crusty, overlapping layers, slightly interrupted in some places by low terraces, or as in the case of the Mammoth Hot Springs at the north end of the peak, where the building waters issue from the side of a steep hill, the deposits form a succession of higher and broader terraces, of white travertine tinged with purple, like the famous Pink Terrace at Rotomahana, New Zealand, draped in front with clustering stalactites, each terrace having a pool of indescribably beautiful water upon it, in a basin with a raised rim that glistens with conferva. The whole, when viewed at a distance of a mile or two, looking like a broad, massive cascade pouring over shelving rocks in snowy, purpled foam. The stones of this divine masonry, invisible particles of lime or silex, mined in quarries no eye has seen, go to their appointed places in gentle, tinkling, transparent currents, or through the dashing turmoil of floods, as surely guided as the sap of plants, streaming into bowl and branch, leaf and flower, and thus from century to century, this beauty work has gone on and is going on. Passing through many a mile of pine and spruce woods, toward the center of the park, you come to the famous Yellowstone Lake. It is about 20 miles long and 15 wide, and lies at a height of nearly 8,000 feet above the level of the sea, amid dense black forests and snowy mountains. Around its winding, wavering shores, closely forested and picturesquely varied, with promontories and bays, the distance is more than 100 miles. It is not very deep, only from 200 to 300 feet, and contains less water than the celebrated Lake Tahoe of the California Sierra, which is nearly the same size, lies at a height of 6,400 feet, and is over 1,600 feet deep. But no other lake in North America of equal area lies so high as the Yellowstone, or gives birth to so noble a river. The terraces around its shore show that at the close of the glacial period, its surface was about 160 feet higher than it is now, and its area nearly twice as great. It is full of trout and a vast multitude of birds, swans, pelicans, geese, ducks, cranes, herons, curlews, plovers, snipe, feed in it and upon its shores, and many forest animals come out of the woods and wade a little way in shallow sandy places to drink and look about them, and cool themselves in the free-flowing breeze. In calm weather, it is a magnificent mirror for the woods and mountains and sky, now pattered with hail and rain, now roughened with sudden storms that send waves to fringe the shores and wash its border of gravel and sand. The Absaroka Mountains and the Wind River Plateau on the east and south pour their gathered waters into it, and the river issues from the north side in a broad, smooth, stately current, silently gliding with such serene majesty that one fancies it knows the vast journey of 4,000 miles that lies before it and the work it has to do. For the first 20 miles, its course is in a level, sunny valley, lightly fringed with trees, through which it flows in silvery reaches, stirred into spangles here and there by ducks and leaping trout, making no sound save a low whispering among the pebbles and the dipping willows and sedges of its banks. Then suddenly, as if preparing for hard work, it rushes eagerly, impetuously forward, rejoicing in its strength, breaks into foam bloom, and goes thundering down into the Grand Canyon in two magnificent falls, 100 and 300 feet high. The canyon is so tremendously wild and impressive that even these great falls cannot hold your attention. It is about 20 miles long and 1,000 feet deep, a weird, unearthly-looking gorge of jagged, fantastic architecture, and most brilliantly colored. Here the Washburn Range, forming the northern rim of the Yellowstone Basin, made up mostly of beds of rhyolite, decomposed by the action of thermal waters, has been cut through and laid open to view by the river, and a famous section it has made. It is not the depth or the shape of the canyon, nor the waterfall, nor the green and gray river chanting its brave song as it goes foaming on its way, that most impresses the observer, but the colors of the decomposed volcanic rocks. With few exceptions, the traveler in strange lands finds that, however much the scenery and vegetation in different countries may change, Mother Earth is ever familiar and the same. But here the very ground is changed, as if belonging to some other world. The walls of the canyon from top to bottom burn in a perfect glory of color, confounding and dazzling when the sun is shining. White, yellow, green, blue, vermilion, and various other shades of red indefinitely blending. All the earth hereabouts seems to be paint. Millions of tons of it lie in sight, exposed to wind and weather as if of no account. Yet, marvelously fresh and bright, fast colors not to be washed out or bleached out by either sunshine or storms. The effect is so novel and awful, we imagine that even a river might be afraid to enter such a place, but the rich and gentle beauty of the vegetation is reassuring. The lovely Linnea borealis hangs her twin bells over the brink of the cliffs. Forests and gardens extend their treasures in smiling confidence on either side. Nuts and berries ripen well, whatever may be going on below. Blind fears vanish, and the grand gorge seems a kindly, beautiful part of the general harmony, full of peace and joy and goodwill. The park is easy of access. Locomotives drag you to its northern boundary at Cinnabar, and horses and guides do the rest. From Cinnabar you will be whirled in coaches along the foaming Gardner River to Mammoth Hot Springs, thence through woods and meadows, gulches and ravines, along branches of the upper Gallatin, Madison, and Firehole rivers to the main geyser basins, thence over the Continental Divide and back again, up and down through dense pine, spruce, and fir woods to the magnificent Yellowstone Lake, along its northern shore to the outlet, down the river to the falls and Grand Canyon, and thence back through the woods to Mammoth Hot Springs and Cinnabar, stopping here and there at the so-called points of interest among the geysers, springs, paint pots, mud volcanoes, etc., where you will be allowed a few minutes or hours to saunter over the cinder pavements, watch the play of a few of the geysers, and peer into some of the most beautiful and terrible of the craters and pools. These wonders you will enjoy, and also the views of the mountains, the long willowy glacier and beaver meadows, the beds of violets, gentians, phloxes, asters, phacelias, goldenrods, eriogonums, and many other flowers, some species giving color to whole meadows and hillsides. And you will enjoy your short views of the great lake and river and canyon. No Indians will you see. The Blackfeet and Bannocks that once roamed here are gone. So are the old beaver catchers, the Coulters and Bridgers, with all their attractive buckskin and romance. There are several bands of buffaloes in the park, but you will not thus cheaply in tourist fashion see them, nor many of the other large animals hidden in the wilderness. The songbirds, too, keep mostly out of sight of the rushing tourist, though off the roads, thrushes, warblers, orioles, grosbeaks, etc., keep the air sweet and merry. Perhaps in passing rapids and falls you may catch glimpses of the water ouzel, but in the whirling noise you will not hear his song. Fortunately, no road noise frightens the Douglas squirrel, and his merry play and gossip will amuse you all through the woods. Here and there a deer may be seen crossing the road, or a bear. Most likely, however, the only bears you will see are the half-tame ones that go to the hotels every night for dinner table scraps, yeast powder biscuit, Chicago canned stuff, mixed pickles, and beefsteaks that have proved too tough for the tourists. Among the gains of a coach trip are the acquaintances made and the fresh views into human nature, for the wilderness is a shrewd touchstone, even thus lightly approached, and brings many a curious trait to view. Setting out, the driver cracks his whip, and the 4 horses go off at half gallop, half trot, in trained, showy style, until out of sight of the hotel. The coach is crowded, old and young side by side, blooming and fading, full of hope and fun and care. Some look at the scenery or the horses, and all ask questions, an odd mixed lot of them. Where is the umbrella? What is the name of that blue flower over there? Are you sure the little bag is aboard? Is that hollow yonder a crater? How is your throat this morning? How high did you say the geysers spout? How does the elevation affect your head? Is that a geyser reeking over there in the rocks, or only a hot spring? A long ascent is made. The solemn mountains come to view. Small cares are quenched, and all becomes natural and silent, save perhaps some unfortunate expounder who has been reading guidebook geology and rumbles forth foggy subsidences and upheavals until he is in danger of being heaved overboard. The driver will give you the names of the peaks and meadows and streams as you come to them. Call attention to the glass road. Tell how hard it was to build, how the obsidian cliffs naturally pushed the surveyor's lines to the right, and the industrious beavers, by flooding the valley in front of the cliff, pushed them to the left. Geysers, however, are the main objects, and as soon as they come in sight, other wonders are forgotten. All gather around the crater of the one that is expected to play first. During the eruptions of the smaller geysers, such as the Beehive and Old Faithful, though a little frightened at first, all welcome the glorious show with enthusiasm and shout, "Oh, how wonderful, beautiful, splendid, majestic." Some venture near enough to stroke the column with a stick, as if it were a stone pillar or a tree, so firm and substantial and permanent it seems. While tourists wait around a large geyser, such as the castle or the giant, there is a chatter of small talk in anything but solemn mood, and during the intervals between the preliminary splashes and upheavals, some adventurer occasionally looks down the throat of the crater, admiring the silex formations, and wondering whether Hades is so beautiful. But when, with awful uproar, as if avalanches were falling and storms thundering in the depths, the tremendous outburst begins, all run away to a safe distance and look on, awe-stricken and silent, in devout, worshipping wonder. The largest and one of the most wonderfully beautiful of the springs is the prismatic, which the guide will be sure to show you. With a circumference of 300 yards, it is more like a lake than a spring. The water is pure deep blue in the center, fading to green on the edges, and its basin and the slightly terraced pavement about it are astonishingly bright and varied in color. This one of the multitude of Yellowstone fountains is of itself object enough for a trip across the continent. No wonder that so many fine myths have originated in springs, that so many fountains were held sacred in the youth of the world and had miraculous virtues ascribed to them. Even in these cold, doubting, questioning, scientific times, many of the Yellowstone fountains seem able to work miracles. Near the prismatic spring is the great Excelsior geyser, which is said to throw a column of boiling water 60 to 70 feet in diameter to a height of from 50 to 300 feet at irregular periods. This is the greatest of all the geysers yet discovered anywhere. The Firehole River, which sweeps past it, is at ordinary states a stream about 100 yards wide and 3 feet deep, but when the geyser is in eruption, so great is the quantity of water discharged that the volume of the river is doubled, and it is rendered too hot and rapid to be forded. Geysers are found in many other volcanic regions. In Iceland, New Zealand, Japan, the Himalayas, the Eastern Archipelago, South America, the Azores, and elsewhere. But only in Iceland, New Zealand, and this Rocky Mountain Park do they display their grandest forms, and of these three famous regions the Yellowstone is easily first, both in the number and in the size of its geysers. The greatest height of the column of the Great Geyser of Iceland, actually measured, was 212 feet, and of the Strucker, 162 feet. In New Zealand, the Te Puea at Lake Taupo, the Waikiki at Rotorua, and two others are said to lift their waters occasionally to a height of 100 feet, while the celebrated Te Tarata at Rotomahana sometimes lifts a boiling column 20 feet in diameter to a height of 60 feet. But all these are far surpassed by the Excelsior. Few tourists, however, will see the Excelsior in action, or 1,000 other interesting features of the park that lie beyond the wagon roads and the hotels. The regular trips, from 3 to 5 days, are too short. Nothing can be done well at a speed of 40 miles a day. The multitude of mixed, novel impressions rapidly piled on one another make only a dreamy, bewildering, swirling blur, most of which is unrememberable. Far more time should be taken. Walk away quietly in any direction and taste the freedom of the mountaineer. Camp out among the grass and gentians of glacier meadows, in craggy garden nooks full of nature's darlings. Climb the mountains and get their good tidings. Nature's peace will flow into you as sunshine flows into trees. The winds will blow their own freshness into you, and the storms their energy, while cares will drop off like autumn leaves. As age comes on, One source of enjoyment after another is closed, but nature's sources never fail. Like a generous host, she offers here brimming cups in endless variety, served in a grand hall, the sky its ceiling, the mountains its woods, decorated with glorious paintings and enlivened with bands of music ever playing. The petty discomforts that beset the awkward guest, the unskilled camper, are quickly forgotten, while all that is precious remains. Fears vanish as soon as one is fairly free in the wilderness. Most of the dangers that haunt the unseasoned citizen are imaginary. The real ones are perhaps too few rather than too many for his good. The bears that always seem to spring up thick as trees in fighting, devouring attitudes before the frightened tourist whenever a camping trip is proposed are gentle now, finding they are no longer likely to be shot. And rattlesnakes, the other big irrational dread of over-civilized people, are scarce here, for most of the park lies above the snake line. Poor creatures, loved only by their maker, they are timid and bashful, as mountaineers know, and though perhaps not possessed of much of that charity that suffers long and is kind, seldom, either by mistake or by mishap, do harm to anyone. Certainly they cause not the 100th part of the pain and death that follow the footsteps of the admired Rocky Mountain trapper. Nevertheless, again and again, in season and out of season, the question comes up, what are rattlesnakes good for? As if nothing that does not obviously make for the benefit of man had any right to exist, as if our ways were God's ways. Long ago, an Indian to whom a French traveler put this old question replied that their tails were good for toothache and their heads for fever. Anyhow, they are all, head and tail, good for themselves, and we need not begrudge them their share of life. Fear nothing. No town park you have been accustomed to saunter in is so free from danger as the Yellowstone. It is a hard place to leave. Even its names in your guidebook are attractive and should draw you far from wagon roads, all save the early ones derived from the infernal regions, Hell-Roaring River, Hell-Broth Springs, the Devil's Cauldron, etc. Indeed, the whole region was at first called Coulter's Hell, from the fiery brimstone stories told by Trapper Coulter, who left the Lewis and Clark expedition and wandered through the park in the year 1807 with a band of Bannock Indians. The later names, many of which we owe to Mr. Arnold Haig of the U.S. Geological Survey, are so telling and exhilarating that they set our pulses dancing and make us begin to enjoy the pleasures of excursions ere they are commenced. 3 River Peak, 2 Ocean Pass, Continental Divide are capital geographical descriptions, suggesting thousands of miles of rejoicing streams and all that belongs to them. Bighorn Pass, Bison Peak, Big Game Ridge bring brave mountain animals to mind. Birch Hills, Garnet Hills, Amethyst Mountain, Storm Peak, Electric Peak, Roaring Mountain are bright, bracing names. Wapiti, Beaver, Tern and Swan lakes conjure up fine pictures, and so also do Osprey and Ouzel Falls, Antelope Creek, Otter, Mink, and Grayling Creeks, Geode, Jasper, Opal, Carnelian, and Chalcedony Creeks are lively and sparkling names that help the streams to shine. And Azalea, Stellaria, Arnica, Aster, and Phlox Creeks. What pictures these bring up! Violet, Morning Mist, Hygeia, Beryl, Vermilion, and Indigo Springs, and many beside, give us visions of fountains more beautifully arrayed than Solomon in all his purple and golden glory. All these and a host of others call you to camp. You may be a little cold some nights on mountain tops above the timberline, but you will see the stars, and by you can sleep enough in your town bed, or at least in your grave. Keep awake while you may, in mountain mansions so rare. If you are not very strong, try to climb Electric Peak when a big, bossy, well-charged thundercloud is on it, to breathe the ozone set free, and get yourself kindly shaken and shocked. You are sure to be lost in wonder and praise, and every hair of your head will stand up and hum and sing like an enthusiastic congregation. After this reviving experience, you should take a look into a few of the tertiary volumes of the grand geological library of the park and see how God writes history. No technical knowledge is required, only a calm day and a calm mind. Perhaps nowhere else in the Rocky Mountains have the volcanic forces been so busy. More than 10,000 square miles hereabouts have been covered to a depth of at least 5,000 feet with material spouted from chasms and craters during the Tertiary period, forming broad sheets of basalt, andesite, rhyolite, etc., and marvelous masses of ashes, sand, cinders, and stones, now consolidated into conglomerates, charged with the remains of plants and animals that lived in the calm, genial periods that separated the volcanic outbursts. Perhaps the most interesting and telling of these rocks to the hasty tourist are those that make up the mass of Amethyst Mountain. On its north side it presents a section 2,000 feet high of roughly stratified beds of sand, ashes, and conglomerates, coarse and fine, forming the untrimmed edges of a wonderful set of volumes lying on their sides, books 1,000,000 years old, well bound, miles in size, with full-page illustrations. On the ledges of this one section, we see trunks and stumps of 15 or 20 ancient forests ranged one above another, standing where they grew, or prostrate and broken like the pillars of ruined temples in desert sands, a forest 15 or 20 stories high, the roots of each spread above the tops of the next beneath it, telling wonderful tales of the bygone centuries, with their winters and summers, growth and death, fire, ice, and flood. There were giants in those days. The largest of the standing opal and agate stumps and prostrate sections of the trunks are from 2 or 3 to 50 feet in height or length, and from 5 to 10 feet in diameter. And so perfect is the petrifaction that the annual rings and ducts are clearer and more easily counted than those of living trees, centuries of burial having brightened the records instead of blurring them. They show that the winters of the Tertiary period gave as decided a check to vegetable growth as do those of the present time. Some trees favorably located grew rapidly, increasing 20 inches in diameter in as many years, while others of the same species, on poorer soil or overshadowed, increased only 2 or 3 inches in the same time. Among the roots and stumps of the old forest floors, we find the remains of ferns and bushes, and the seeds and leaves of trees like those now growing on the southern Alleghanies, such as magnolia, sassafras, laurel, linden, persimmon, ash, alder, dogwood. Studying the lowest of these forests, the soil it grew on, and the deposits it is buried in, we see that it was rich in species and flourished in a genial, sunny climate. When its stately trees were in their glory, volcanic fires broke forth with chasms and craters like larger geysers, spouting ashes, cinders, stones, and mud, which fell on the doomed forest like hail and snow, sifting, hurtling through the leaves and branches, choking the streams, covering the ground, crushing bushes and ferns, rapidly deepening, packing around the trees and breaking them, rising higher until the topmost boughs of the giants were buried, leaving not a leaf or twig in sight, so complete was the desolation. At last the volcanic storm began to abate. The fiery soil settled. Mud floods and boulder floods passed over it, enriching it, cooling it. Rains fell and mellow sunshine, and it became fertile and ready for another crop. Birds and the winds and roaming animals brought seeds from more fortunate woods, and a new forest grew up on the top of the buried one. Centuries of genial growing seasons passed. The seedling trees became giants, and with strong, outreaching branches spread a leafy canopy over the gray land. The sleeping subterranean fires again awake and shake the mountains, and every leaf trembles. The old craters, with perhaps new ones, are opened, and immense quantities of ashes, pumice, and cinders are again thrown into the sky. The sun, and shorn of his beams, glows like a dull red ball until hidden in sulphurous clouds. Volcanic snow, hail, and floods fall on the new forest, burying it alive like the one beneath its roots. Then come another noisy band of mud floods and boulder floods, mixing, settling, enriching the new ground, more seeds, quickening sunshine and showers, and a third noble magnolia forest is carefully raised on the top of the second, and so on. Forest was planted above forest and destroyed, as if nature were ever repenting, undoing the work she had so industriously done, and burying it. Of course, this destruction was creation, progress in the march of beauty through death. How quickly these old monuments excite and hold the imagination. We see the old stone stumps, budding and blossoming and waving in the wind, as magnificent trees, standing shoulder to shoulder, branches interlacing in grand, varied, round-headed forests, see the sunshine of morning and evening gilding their mossy trunks, and at high noon spangling on the thick, glossy leaves of the magnolia, filtering through translucent canopies of linden and ash, and falling in mellow patches on the ferny floor. See the shining after rain breathe the exhaling fragrance, and hear the winds and birds and the murmur of brooks and insects. We watch them from season to season, see the swelling buds when the sap begins to flow in the spring, the opening leaves and blossoms, the ripening of summer fruits, the colors of autumn, and the maze of leafless branches and sprays in winter, and we see the sudden oncome of the storms that overwhelmed them. And on those imaginative visions, I think we'll end this evening's reading from Our National Parks by the great American naturalist John Muir. I'm always enchanted by his use of language to describe nature, and I hope you enjoyed that as well. If you'd like to read this work for yourself and see the photographs it contains, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.